into some of the things you touched on. I got Adrienne Morawski here. She's with Government Affairs with the Chicago Realtors. She focuses on county issues that come up. It's so many issues coming up in so many different places that they have to kind of have people in different pockets so we don't miss anything. And Adrienne, tell us a little bit about your week, how busy you've been kind of fighting the fight, some of the things that we should look that's on the horizon, and some of the wins that we have, and some of the challenges that we're having with this legislation.
Sure. Thank you, Tony, for having me. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for staying in the business. Thank you for hanging in there. I know it's been just a tough few years. As Mike talked about, you know, the term landlord just doesn't do it justice from all of the things that you do in your community. So thank you. And Mike, you've done such a great job at NBOA. And whenever I first met you, I feel like I was so late coming into the just housing discussion that I didn't bring a lot of value, but I learned a lot, and it definitely started our relationship on fighting some of these battles that unfortunately continue to happen and just don't seem to be going away. So this week, you know, the hot topic was rent control, and I think that's top of mind for most people in housing. Whether or not you're on the landlord side or the housing provider side or the tenant side, you know, I think we can all agree that rent control just is not an effective solution to the housing crisis that we are in. Other markets have really displayed how harmful rent control can be. This week, HB 116 was heard in the Housing Committee, and it did end up passing that committee, and it will go to the House floor in April. I believe it will be the week of April 12th. Now, it's going to be a battle. It will continue to be a battle, but what the HB 116 would do would lift a ban so local jurisdictions could enact some form of rent control. Now, there's no consistency in what local jurisdictions would do if for some reason the HB 116 were to pass. So you could have different communities implementing some form of rent control. And we know rent control as no increase, but then there's rent stabilization to where you can adjust your rents based off of the cost of living. And then there's a cap on how much that increase could be every year. I think in Illinois, especially in Cook County, where you have property taxes increasing based off of various tax rates to meet the needs and costs of communities, sometimes it feels as though there's no control over property taxes. And then to have the state lift the ban and enable local jurisdictions to have rent control would be very problematic, especially when you're so tight on just on the operational side, especially after 2020. What I'm hearing is just the costs, whether it's trash pickup, snow removal, all of these costs keep building up, and then to be limited, I think would be very problematic because it just would make it so much less affordable to be an operator and to be a smaller operator or investor in real estate on the residential side. A couple of other bills I'll mention from the state. There's a homeless prevention bill, HB 2775. You all are familiar with the source of income protection. That is a protected class in Cook County. This particular bill would say that you cannot limit income. So if you have a limit on income, so if you say you're only renting to someone that makes $30,000 a year, you cannot apply that type of restriction to someone with a source of income under this piece of legislation. So I think that, you know, there are some issues with that. There are some real concerns over how that would actually play out, and it would be a civil rights violation. So it would be, if implemented, it would be extremely concerning Another piece of legislation, HB 589, application cap of $20. Now, to run a background check, you know that that's much, typically, I think that's going to be a lot more than $20, maybe not, but $20, you know, it just, there are some reasons why that was put into place as tenants apply for multiple units. So I've heard, you know, I'm not quite sure if that's actually going to move, or if the homeless prevention bill that I had mentioned, if those are moving. But I think we're going to continue to see this assumption that landlords can absorb these costs, and that you're going to continue to see these things happen. So your involvement with not only this group, with NBOA, but your voice is really critical, because your voice as an owner and operator goes so much further than mine as a hired lobbyist. You're in the trenches every single day. You are the ones telling us, you know, the costs of operating is so high. So your involvement is really key. So, you know, if you have those relationships with your elected officials in Springfield, now's the time to reach out to them. If you see a call for action coming from NBOA or from the realtors, or even from the Chicago Land Apartment Association, please take action. I mean, your voice is very, very valuable. Even this week, we had an excellent response with filing witness slips. So I'll move on to just a couple of other things. And Tony, if you are on a time limit, and I know you've got to hear from Stacy and Dan, I don't want to take away from them, but I'll go through just a couple of things as, you know, we're talking here. County issues, you know, the assessor is reassessing the city property values. That process seems to have been a little bit delayed, but they'll start with Rogers Park, and I think they'll have the same schedule, but the valuation forms will be sent out as soon as the property has been reassessed. And then any COVID factor adjustment that your property is receiving will be applied to the second installment of your property tax bill that you receive and you'll receive that in August. So hopefully that makes sense. But I would just pay attention to, you know, if you did receive a COVID adjustment, what that means and how it may impact the future. You know, there could be a little bit of a fluctuation. You may have gotten a reduction from 2020, but 2022, you know, the following years, you may see a slight increase based off of this minor adjustment or this adjustment that you saw from COVID. You know about the RTLO, don't have to spend a lot of time on that issue. It doesn't go into effect until June 1st. The county did adopt the final summary, so that is available. That needs to be attached to leases, just like you would apply, and just like how you attach a summary of Chicago's RLTO. You have to do that in the county if you're working in other communities. And then finally, with the city, the big issue right now is something called the ARO, Affordable Requirements Ordinance. It applies to new development. You may be very familiar with this, but it's clear that that hasn't worked. And in fact, it's probably contributed to the housing crisis that we're in. My colleague, Chris Anderson, is working on this issue, really trying to communicate the harmful effect of what inclusionary zoning, mandatory inclusionary housing policies do to communities. And especially in Chicago, it has failed to achieve the housing numbers that we need. I believe we're short by 120,000 housing units. And whenever you increase the costs of development, you decrease the supply because you can't mandate development, right? So investors and people who want to develop will go to other markets where it's cheaper, where it's less risky. So under the ARO proposal right now, there is a 30% AMI requirement for development, which AMI, area median income, 30% is pretty low on the affordability scale. And to assume that someone who is making 30% of the AMI to continue to afford to live and to be able to maintain a lifestyle that every other person in that housing unit can afford. I think that there's a huge discrepancy in the ability to get housing, just to decrease the housing supply. That is still not going to change the dynamics. So the ARO has failed, and it will likely to continue to fail with policies that don't recognize that there is a middle income group of people that need housing supply. So with that, Tony, I'll stop talking and see if there are any questions. But again, I think that, with the need for housing, I mean, I think that there can be arguments made that more money for housing vouchers is absolutely critical. 30% AMI is really unreasonable for inclusionary zoning requirements.
Thanks for sharing that, Adrian. You really stepped through some really complicated topics in a very short period of time. Make sure if you want to share your email address in the chat. If there's more questions for you, there can be some follow-up. But I really appreciate all the work you've done. I chimed in on 2 meetings this week that you were having, organizing, and nobody sees what you're doing in the background. And I really appreciate your efforts to make a difference in this industry. 2 things that Adrian talked about, and what I want to talk about is unintended consequences. And rent control on the top level as a headline sounds like a good thing, right? A lot of realtors rent. A lot of people on my team are renters, right? And a couple of years ago, I was a renter. And rent control, if it's on a ballot initiative, sounds like something that I would support. But when we dig down and when we look into it, right now there's 5 cities that have rent control, and they aren't new, right? So New York City, they enacted rent control in 1943, right? So if rent control was something that'll make a property more affordable and easier to rent, New York City, it wouldn't cost $5,000 to rent an apartment in Manhattan or New York City, right? The cities and the towns with rent control are the most expensive cities to live in. And the unintended consequences is it makes it more difficult for those people that didn't hit the lottery and get those rent control units. And if it's 20%, that means 80% are not going to qualify. DC, they enacted rent control in 1985. And we all know if you want a 1-bedroom apartment in DC, it's probably going to cost you around $2,900. San Francisco, right? Just go to apartments.com. They're in San Francisco, and look up 2-bedroom apartment and then compare it to what your neighborhood in Chicago. Same thing, they started in 1979, and the last city is LA and Oakland, California, 1978 and 1980. They've been doing rent control for a long time, and these cities are the most expensive cities in the United States to live in. And that's the trajectory, and that's the path that we're going on. That is almost, it looks like it may affect the people that, the unintended consequences that are people that we think we're protecting by enacting this kind of legislation may be the people that get hurt the most. I'm going to leave that there. I think she said something about 30% AMI, and I'm a numbers guy. I love numbers. That's why I do commercial real estate. All right. So for South Shore, the average median income for South Shore is $35,000 per household, right? In South Shore. Now that's the good, the bad. Yeah, there's some people in South Shore that make 100,000. There's some people in South Shore that barely make minimum wage, right? When you take all the people, all the apartments, all the units, it comes out to $35,000 a year. If they say there's a requirement that it's 30% of AMI, that would be $35,000 times 30%, $10,500. So that's $10,500 on a yearly basis. Now they say you can only use 30% of your income should go toward housing. So that means 30% of $10,500 toward housing divided by 12 months, that means we would have to rent that apartment in South Shore for $262 to meet that requirement of 30% AMI. So what happens if 20% of the apartments need to be rented for $262? That means the other 80% of the apartments are going to have to go up astronomically to subsidize those 2 units out of every 10. And that's what happened in New York. That's what happened in San Francisco. That's what happened in DC, New York, and Oakland, California. Apartments.com. Google the cities that have rent control and see if you want to move there and rent a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment. Call me if you do, because I'll help you find one. All right. I want to go back, and we have a really aggressive agenda today. I'm really happy. We have Stacy Young with Conservation Compact, and she's a director over there, and they're doing a lot on the front lines and on the back lines. I mean, if you're talking about essential workers, Conservation Compact are essential workers, and they're rolling up their sleeves, and they're fighting the fight for property owners. They're fighting the fight for tenants. They're fighting the fight for everybody that's involved. And Stacy didn't just start doing this. She's been advocating and working in the field and making an impact in our communities for years. Even before that, I think with the city of Chicago. So Stacy, can you turn your microphone on and share with us today the information that you brought for us?
Yeah, and thank you so much for that kind introduction, Tony. It's great to speak to this great group of owners, and hearing Adrian's update is super illuminating too. So appreciate all the information being shared here tonight. So as Tony said, I'm Stacy Young. I work at Community Investment Corporation. So I head up the Preservation Compact, as Tony just said, but CIC, I'm sure, is a nonprofit lender. You're all already familiar with CIC. If you want a loan to acquire and fix up a building, please give my colleagues a call. I can post our information in the chat. But what I do is policy, as Tony was describing. I head up this, we call it a policy collaborative. It's called the Preservation Compact. So we work with all levels of government, for-profit owners, nonprofit owners, civic groups, lenders, even grassroots and community groups. So we try to bring everybody together. And I'll talk about a couple of our issues that we're working on in a second, but I do want to say I'm going to talk about property tax relief. So I let Adrian and Mike give you all the bad news, and I get to share the good news. So I'm going to talk about property tax relief, and then I'm going to spend a minute on a webpage that we created. We've been having weekly meetings with the county, city, and IDA about their emergency rental assistance, and they worked with us to put together one webpage that actually includes sort of most of the information that they're aware of, because not all of them have launched programs yet. But I want to spend a minute on that too, just so you guys know that that resource is out there. But I'm going to spend most of my time talking about this statewide property tax relief legislation that we worked with a lot of you in this room over the years. I've talked to a lot of you about this property tax relief legislation. So I'm going to share my screen just to give you a real quick and dirty description of it. So I'm sure that most of you are familiar back in the old days, a program that Cook County had called the Class 9 program. So the Class 9 program, I'm not going to describe it. If you're familiar with it, you're mad, because it used to be very effective and very transparent and very predictable. And around about 2008, 2010, that all changed. The assessor changed the property classification and structure. And as a result, that program became less valuable, less transparent. And that was when we started gathering all these folks together. As I said, government, for-profit, nonprofit owners, community groups, because they all recognize that if building owners get an incentive to do something, they're probably going to do it. And property taxes are a really effective way to provide these kinds of. So what we did was, work with all these different groups, and we put together a very simple proposal. And that's what I have shared here on my screen. So here's what the proposal is. And you can see the bill numbers up top there. So again, this is keyed off of Class 9. So if you remember how Class 9 worked, if you're in Class 9 now, very similar structure. This requires an investment and a set aside of units that are affordable. In this case, the affordability is 60% of area median income. And so, you can think, $50,000, $45,000, $50,000 for a family of 4. So it's 60% of AMI. So your rents have to be affordable at that level. And again, you can think to yourself, depending on bedroom size, $1,100 a month-ish, depending on your bedroom size. So you have to have a percentage of affordability and you have to have this investment. And here it's all laid out for you. It's actually $12.50 per square foot. If you invest $12.50 per square foot, or you're doing new construction and you hold 35% of your units as affordable, and again, affordable to 60% of AMI, which in a lot of the markets on the south side, at least some of those units that you have are going to be affordable at that level, and very likely at least 35%. So you do that and you get a 35% reduction in your assessed value, just like Class 9. It's a 10-year reduction, and you can renew that reduction up to 30 years every 10 years. So you come to 10 years. I hate to say this, you have to call the building department. They have to give you a clean bill of health on that building, but then you get to renew that for another 10 years and another 10 years after that, again, up to 30 years. So that's this, the tier that probably you'll be the most interested in market, most of the neighborhoods on the south side, but we did create another tier, and here's why. This is not like Class 9. So what we did with this was the 35%, very similar to Class 9. And then we talked to some owners in higher cost markets. So think about, Lincoln Square, Albany Park, Rogers Park, Edgewater, those kinds of markets where the rents are higher. And if I told them that they needed to artificially lower their rents, 35% of the units, artificially lowering, it's too much to ask. We would have to take too much off their property taxes to balance out their income, right? And so what we did is we said, okay, what's something that will work? We have CoStar data, we did a bunch of analysis, and we came up with 15% affordability. So again, affordable to 60% of AMI. You do that, you invest $8 a square foot, because those markets, investment there's probably already investment going on. But then you get a 25% reduction in your assessed value. So again, it's not 35%. So if you can do 35% affordable, $12 a square foot, you're going to go for that 35% reduction. But if you're in a neighborhood where the rents are higher and you don't want to and you have to artificially lower your rents because those rents are closer to $1,500, $2,000, whatever, then you can go for this tier. It's less relief, it's less affordability, but it's better than a kick in the pants. If you're looking at doing something to your property anyway, this is a nice tier of relief for you. So that's the property tax relief bill that we're working on. Again, SB 330, great news. Again, thanks to people in this room that called their senators in support. This bill did pass out of the Revenue Committee on the Senate side yesterday. So that's really nice. That's good news. So Senator Feigenholtz is the lead sponsor in the Senate. And then Representative Curtis Tarver is the representative and chief sponsor in the House. So I would just say, if you have relationships with your senators, even with your representatives over on the House side, give them a call. Tell them that you like these bills. Try to create some momentum. I can give Tony some, tweets that he can tweet out, and Adrian, and I've been, working with all of you to make sure you're aware of this stuff. I'm always happy to talk more, and I'll definitely put my information in the chat if anybody wants to talk more about this. But I'm happy to answer questions. And then, like I said, I'd love to just spend a minute on this emergency rental assistance page that we put together. Great. That's how clear I am in my. Oh, Jerry Brown. I should have known you'd have a question. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for your presentation. I know you've been working on this for some time. Any indication as to whether the governor is likely to sign this if it passes?
I mean, again, there's bipartisan support. This passed unanimously out of that Senate committee. The one who was most passionate in his support was the Republican co-chair of the committee. So this isn't just kind of a Democratic bill for the folks who care about affordable housing. So, you know, we have been working on a long time, Jerry, and who knows, maybe this is our year. I hope
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, explaining class
Heaven knows.
9 to property owners, particularly outside of Cook County, is quite a frustrating experience. They just can't understand why it would work this way.
Yes, I agree with you about that.
Yeah. Mm.
And if
So,
there are no, oh, go ahead, Mike. Yeah.
So help us through, say you have a 6 flat on the north side and you want a capital to invest in renovation. Are you talking like class 9, you got to do 3 building systems or something?
Yes, and it's so again, we keyed off of class 9 for that investment requirement. So it's yes, it's building systems, all the building systems that are required for or are eligible for class 9, same thing. So HVAC, plumbing, electrical, accessibility, energy efficiency, you know, ADUs fit into that. So, you know, if you were going to be building out an ADU, those are touching all of those systems. So that'll work too, as long as you get to that either $12.50 or $8 a square foot. And it's 7 or more units. Now, we did specifically put in there that if you have a 6 flat and you're adding an ADU, that gets you to 7, and so you're in.
So you're looking at the total rentable square feet in that structure and $8 a square
Yes.
foot for the total hallways,
Yes.
apartment, everything, and then up to 3 different building systems, which could be a ADU or just upgrades. And to whom is it CIC that's overseeing and implementing those requirements, or are we have to deal with the city on that, or who's
So
checking?
it's just like class 9. This is the great question. The assessor's office is the administrating agency, just like class 9. And we worked very closely with their agency, with the assessor, to make sure that they understood what we were doing and supported it, and they do. And they, you know, there's language in there that says if you're currently in class 9, if this legislation passes, you can switch over to this program if you'd like. So we took into consideration the existing class 9 properties as well.
Okay.
Stacy, if you don't mind me asking really quick. So it doesn't matter where you're getting the financing from. It's not like that's a prescription. So if you are using PACE financing to do some upgrades to your property, you could possibly apply for if it fits within the requirements.
You got it. You got it. Yeah, and again, just like class 9, you know, you show your permits to the assessor, you know, you show that you did the work. I mean, that's all. It's class 9's a pretty easy, as these things go, pretty easy to administer. The great thing about this is it affects the existing building stock. It doesn't carry so many requirements that it's discouraging owners from participating, and it's insanely efficient when you think about how many dollars of government subsidy typically it takes to create an affordable unit. This actually has no fiscal impact because of the investment requirement. So if your building had this value at the beginning, you invested, and now you're looking at that assessment reduction, it's just taking off kind of that incremental investment that you added on the top. And that's why the legislators really like it. That's why the Republicans like it, because there's not a fiscal impact. It's not going to shift the tax burden to the other classifications.
So why does this not sail through tomorrow? It seems like an easy no-brainer. Who's opposing it?
I'm with you. No one opposes it, Mike. The IML is even neutral. You know it's serious when the IML is neutral, right, Adrian? I mean, this is like the Illinois Municipal League hates everything. So we're hoping. So call your people, man. Call your people. Tell them you like these bills.
Okay.
And I'm going to quickly share my screen for this web page. This is a web page that, like I said, we worked. Can you see this web page now? Is everyone saying?
Yeah.
So this is a web page we worked with, like I said, all these agencies, the IDA, the City of Chicago, and Cook County. The idea was if we can put all of their information in one place in one context, and they have reviewed it and they agree with it and they're helping us update it, that everyone doesn't have to create their own comparison charts, their own one pagers. We tried to put it all in one place. As you see, it's a very easy chaicookillrenthelp.org. Very easy to remember. And here you go. This is Tony had this in his notice for the meeting. This is a comparison chart of the programs. Again, only Cook County is launched right now. Ida will likely launch in sometime in April, and the city probably in early May. So this is, it's in Spanish. We have a little map if you're not sure. If you are eligible, where you're eligible for. So there you go. And then it's in Spanish.
Stacy, for sharing that. The website is in the chat, and you can go there. You can apply for rental assistance. You can learn about all the rules for applying for rental assistance, and it's really organized and a really good tool. I saved it in my favorites, and I've been sharing it with as many property owners and real estate practitioners as possible. All of this is helpful. The program that Stacy's referring to is great. It does a lot. All of the legislation, like, I don't think that the rent control legislation comes from a nefarious place. I think that it's all coming because we recognize that there's a need for affordable housing. There's a shortage of affordable housing. In Chicago, there's a shortage of affordable housing throughout the United States. And when you start looking for quality affordable housing, it's even less, right? We got a bigger problem on our hands. And this program that Stacy was outlining encourages investment in our communities. And investment puts people to work, right? It stimulates the economy, even just the local economy, because people are working. And the end result of it is more affordable housing, right? And sometimes owners are afraid to pull that permit, because if I pull this permit, the assessor is going to find out about it and my property taxes may go up. So that's why they're saying, hey, you don't have to worry about that, because we're going to give you an incentive to do so. And it comes in the form of a break in your property taxes. So if you look at this and you're trying to figure out all these moving parts and why does it matter, right? It matters because at the end result is that there's more quality, affordable housing in our communities, right? And that's citywide. Right. I think that the scale is disproportionate. I don't like the fact that you go into South Shore, you go into West Woodlawn, and 70% of the rentals are affordable. And then you go into another neighborhood and none of the rentals are affordable. Like if these programs are distributed and they're encouraging this investment in Rogers Park, and they're encouraging this investment in Lincoln Park, and they're encouraging this investment over there, then there'll be more affordable housing throughout the city. And I think the end result will be good. Now, we got a pretty aggressive agenda. We're right on schedule though. With 6:32, our meetings always go to 7:30. We do try to save some time at the end for networking. We'll put you in the breakout rooms if possible. But if not, we have Dan Wagner here. Dan Wagner is a great guy. Past president of the Chicago Association of Realtors. Just a guy that I like to see Dan and shake his hand. I wish we weren't in this situation. I'd give him a big hug today, but always encouraging me. He sends me little notes here and there. Hey, Tony, keep up the good work. Hey, Tony, the other day I got a surprise gift in the mail from Dan. And I said, hey, you can present to the South Side. So, but anyway, Dan representing Inland Real Estate. Inland Real Estate is the largest real estate owner in the United States. They have more real estate than anyone. They're going to tell you how you can get in on that. They're going to tell you about a great program, about the 1031 exchange program, and how you can get in. Tell us more, Dan, about why this is important, some of the things you've been working on, and take it from here. It's all yours.
Tony, you're the best. Are you able to see the screen? Did I do it okay?
We can see the screen just fine.
Yay! All right. I'm always technically challenged. Well, I got to tell you, you are a leader And I love the fact that you say yes to everything. You say yes to running the commercial forum for the Chicago Association of Realtors. You say yes for this organization. I mean, it takes a leader to say yes and to make things happen. And I want to thank Ebony Lucas also for saying yes today. And boy, oh boy, like you said, this has been a really top-notch program. To have Adrian on, just a rock star. Stacy, thank you so much. Today, I'm excited to be able to bring to you also Lauren Spidell and Nate Kuhn, are my associates, are going to be part of this process. I think what I heard you say is you wanted us to go till 7 o'clock. Is that what you would like, Tony? And then we will
do your thing. Do your thing. I'll come in and slow you down, but you got time. We typically go to about 7:30, so
Okay.
You got time.
All right. Well, I'm going to first get started. I'm going to be. You mentioned the Inland Real Estate Group. So we're 4 Chicago public school teachers that started. They started getting other Chicago public school teachers to give them money for investing in the summertime. They did so well that they left teaching and they ended up becoming the largest landlord of Chicago. They own 42,000 apartments in Chicago. And what happened, I guess the history of why of Inland is growing, it got so big. We're over 50 years in business. We have this huge array of different companies. We've got 1,100 employees. But one of the things that is near and dear to our hearts is the 1031 Litecoin Exchange, because in the 80s, the tax laws changed and we own these apartments, these 42,000 apartments through limited partnerships. And some of the partnerships were underwater, but these 4 teachers would not allow any of their fellow teachers to go bankrupt. So kind of like It's a Wonderful Life story, they put all their money back in the company and they went to Walmart and they said, hey, Walmart, can we do sale leasebacks? Walmart said, okay, happy to. We became the largest landlord of Walmart. And then they went to Treasury and they said, hey, Treasury, can we 1031 exchange these underwater investors into a fractional share interest of a Walmart? And they said, well, nobody's really ever done that before, but you're going to save all these people and take on all the bad stuff. They said, yeah. They said, well, go ahead. So that moment was a pivotal point of doing the right thing. And that's where Inland was launched into the stratosphere. And people from all around couldn't believe that a company would do that. So the 1031 exchange is part and parcel of who we are as a company. And one of the things that that we're very involved with are all of our organizations. But one of the most powerful organizations we're involved with is the National Association of Realtors. And so having somebody like Adrian here who's works for the association is a great example of why when people ask you to donate to RPAC, the Realtors Political Action Committee, that's one of the reasons why you do it, because the 1031 Litecoin Exchange is always on the chopping block for elected officials. And these elected officials now are looking at trying to get rid of the 1031 exchange again. And so the RPAC and all the things that Adrian and all the team that she has, what they do is phenomenal. So I can't thank you enough, Adrian, for all the hard work that you do for us and on behalf of the realtors. Now I'm going to get into the section of the tax code called Section 1031. And one of the ways I'm going to do that is I'm going to ask for Lauren Spidell. I would like Lauren Spidell to be able to introduce herself. Lauren is a qualified intermediary. And Lauren, could you explain to our audience our 1031 Litecoin Exchange? What is it?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I'm Lauren Spidell with Exeter 1031 Exchange Services, and we are a nationwide qualified intermediary. I'm located out of the Chicago area, based really focusing on the Midwest, but work with people nationwide. When you are doing a 1031 is basically a code within the IRS. It's been in the code since 1921, so we are celebrating our 100th year. It allows you to take property that you've held for investment purposes, sell that asset, defer the tax liability associated with the sale, and have all of your proceeds working for you in another asset or multiple assets. And even before it was a code, you would find that farmers would barter for livestock, they'd barter for land. So it was very commonplace to have these types of transactions. Section 1031, again, is specifically for real property that you have the intent to hold. And it can be a great tool for investors. And if you are doing an exchange, you would need someone like myself to help advise and structure the exchange. We're kind of another party involved in your transaction, hold the proceeds. Yeah.
And it's for real property, not stocks and bonds, right?
Right. Stocks and bonds are not considered real property. So anything that's considered real property and anything that you've been holding for investment purposes, which would be rental income, appreciation, or use in a trade or business, will qualify.
Great. Well, let's talk some numbers here. So you have $1 million property, you sell it, and can you kind of go through what brings the million down to 686,000?
Yeah, usually when you're selling an asset, you have a significant amount of tax going back to the IRS. We normally see about 30 to 40% of your gain going back to the IRS. So it's a huge portion of your overall transaction. So if your goal is to build your portfolio or to reinvest in another investment, defer that tax liability, an exchange can certainly make sense. If you are selling an asset, in this example for $1 million, after all of the taxes, so depreciation recapture at 25%, capital gains tax between 15 to 20%, state tax, which is close to 5% here, possibly Medicare surcharge at 3.8%. It's a huge chunk. In this scenario, it gives you about $680,000 to reinvest. With an exchange, you can reinvest all of it. So again, you're deferring all of that tax liability, and you're using that full $1 million to reinvest into another property or multiple properties.
Well, Lauren, I love calling the 1031 exchange the 401k of real estate. 401ks are, you're growing your wealth, your portfolio on your 401k is pre-tax. The same thing with this real estate portfolio. You grow it and grow it and grow it. So thank you, Lauren. Now we're going to jump to our next friend here. And Lauren, you're not related to Inland, right? You're a separate company, correct?
Yes. If you are doing an exchange, you need to hire a qualified intermediary. And keep in mind that it cannot be anyone that's provided you legal or tax advice. We can't be finding you replacement property. We're really an independent third party. We have no relationship with Inland. We have no relationship, unfortunately, with Dan Wagner, even though he's a very close friend of mine. No relationship with Nathan, who'll be speaking in just a few moments. So regardless of if you're doing an exchange, you need a qualified intermediary to help execute that.
Well, thank you, Lauren. And now it's my honor to be able to also introduce Nate Kuhn. Nate, you're next on our discussion of what, tell us about you and who you are.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I'm Nate Kuhn, and my company is Chicagoland 1031 Exchange, and we function in a kind of the role of helping investors or real estate owners that might want to get out of kind of active management of property, or maybe just some of the properties they own, they might want to kind of, as Tony had mentioned earlier, that some of the properties it sounds like people are managing are a lot of work. This is sort of the opposite end of that spectrum, where if you're ready to sit back and sort of enjoy the fruits of your labor and maybe join me with the ski trip out to Colorado, then going the DST route is a possible way for people to go, because you are able to defer the taxes, invest in real estate that Inland or other sponsors are sourcing and managing, and you're enjoying kind of the income from that and hopefully appreciation of those assets as well. So if that's the route that you or somebody that's going down that path at some point, that's certainly something that we're here to help those people through. And kind of just to take a real high level again here real quick is that Lauren's awesome. She's one of our go-to qualified intermediaries. She knows this stuff backwards and forwards. No matter what type of exchange you're doing, you're going to need Lauren. You'll only need me if you decide to go the route of the DSTs, which are these passive investments. But just don't forget Lauren, because we get too many calls of people who say, I just sold property yesterday. I want to do a 1031 exchange. I say, oh, okay, great. Who's your qualified intermediary? And they go, a qualified what? And then their exchange isn't going to work. So just always reach out to Lauren well before the time you're looking to sell a property if you're considering doing a 1031 exchange.
Well, and Nate, the next thing I want to talk about is, Inland created the Delaware Statutory Trust 1031, and that's one of the things Tony wanted to talk about. But also, I want to highlight to everybody, we appreciate you taking time from your family vacation, and you're out in Colorado. So thanks for, and we like your windburned look on your face. So
yeah, lots of snow on the slopes today, so it's going to be good tomorrow. We'll see.
So what's a DST?
So the DST is the Delaware Statutory Trust. So TICs, DSTs, these are all ways to fractionally own real estate. So when you think about going into real estate that you maybe want to be part of, but you don't want to necessarily manage yourself, what the DST really allows investors to do is to buy into something that most of our investors wouldn't be able to purchase on their own. We're talking about $100 million properties. Just by way of example, all of us here, it seems like, are from the Chicago area. You probably heard of Mariano's grocery store. A number of those deals, those properties were put into Delaware Statutory Trust, where some of my investors wouldn't own the whole Mariano's grocery store, but they would own a part of it, and so they would be getting some income from owning that real estate as part of their 1031 exchange proceeds. So really, what the DST is allowing you to do is buy into that fractional ownership of something. And really, the keys to that are a couple of things. One, like we talked about, is passive, and number two, it really does allow for diversification. So we've done exchanges that are, $100,000. We've also done some that are $5 million, $10 million. But what it allows you to do is to diversify. So somebody comes to us with $1 million 1031 exchange. It might be that they buy $500,000 as direct property, but they might want to do DSTs with the other portion of their exchange. It's not all or nothing. But with that money that they put into DSTs, you can also diversify. So you might say, I want to do $250,000 in multifamily and $250,000 in self-storage or net lease. So it does allow investors that opportunity to diversify through different asset classes and geographically as well.
And Nate, let's kind of go through these. The DSTs are different than TICs, tenant and commons, just obviously the number of investors. Why don't you hit a couple of these points for these guys real quick?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing here is back in the day, a lot of these deals were structured as TICs. So you can see the maximum number of investors is 35, and just simple math, you take a big number and divide it by 35, it's still a pretty big number. You take a pretty big number and divide it by 2,000, you really lower the amount that investor needs to put into a deal. So when that change happened, we still have some deals that are structured as TICs, but the vast majority are now structured as Delaware Statutory Trust. It just makes for much lower investment minimums for people to get into their deals, which can allow for smaller investors to go into DSTs through a 1031 exchange, and also allow for larger exchanges to diversify a bit more.
And the ownership structure, you don't, like, in regards to the depreciation passes through, but the loans, you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, so one of the things we'll talk about later too is the debt portion of it. So sometimes we have used, or oftentimes we use the DSTs in conjunction with direct property purchase. So somebody might be buying something directly with a certain amount of leverage, and as part of their exchange, they need to replace all their debt. So some of these DSTs can have moderate leverage all the way up to high leverage, and some have no leverage. So really, the DST can be used as a part or a piece of that puzzle to make sure that the exchange works out well for the investor, to make sure that they're meeting their debt needs. In most situations, we're able to accomplish that for investors.
Well, great. Well, let's go into the three phases of the DST. The first phase, the acquisition and subscription. Obviously, Inland, being in the business for 52 years, our Joe Cosenza is in charge of our acquisitions. He's purchased $49 billion worth of commercial real estate in America. And if anybody knows how to buy stuff, it's Joe. And he's always looking to buy. But Inland does all the underwriting, management of everything. And we know exactly the best areas to go into. But that doesn't mean that your company, Nate, doesn't look at this too. Can you tell us what you guys do to take a look at the acquisition and subscription?
Yeah, so we're working, again, Dan, I think it's that movie, Wedding Crashers, they do the earmuffs. Inland isn't the only DST sponsor that we work with. We work with a number of DST sponsors, but Inland is the largest provider in the space. But that just doesn't mean every one of their deals is rubber stamped by us. We're going to look at the underwriting they're doing on these different deals, kind of look at, when COVID happened, we were looking at some of the different metrics as far as, something that Tony was talking about earlier, with the eviction moratoriums and such. We wanted to make sure how much of rent was being collected in these different properties. And that's all stuff we're staying on top of. So we're definitely looking at properties, but we're also leaning a lot on Inland and their expertise in the buying of what properties that they're looking for and what regions they look at, because I'm here I'm in Colorado now, but I'm from the Chicago area. So I'm not an expert in real estate in Tampa Bay, but Inland already owns a handful of properties there. So when they're buying something there, they kind of got their finger of the pulse on a lot of different markets. So that's really where we're relying on them. And then we're doing our due diligence as well.
And then the second phase is managing these things. So I guess Inland, obviously our experience of knowing how to manage is there, but in regards to how DSTs work, What do people, what should they expect in regards to this investment opportunity for them? Should they expect to have capital calls? How do those kind of things work?
Yeah, so when Inland is, or any of the sponsors really are buying these properties, they're doing a property assessment report at the beginning, engineering analysis, and really reserving what they believe they'll need in kind of future expenses up front. Typically, the life cycle of these DSTs recently has been shorter a little bit, maybe 3 to 5 years. We kind of like to tell our clients 5 to 7 years is a typical hold time, up to maybe 10 years. We kind of look at the financing to look at when we think they might be planning on exiting some of these deals. But again, to Dan's point, you're not managing these properties yourself. You're relying on Inland to do it, and really their expertise throughout the life of the Delaware Statutory Trust.
And is there a percent that people should expect as far as returns on these things, and how does that work?
Yeah, so typically during the life of the fund, I would call that sort of what we would refer to in the industry as a cash on cash return, meaning if you give $100,000, what are you getting as far as cash in your back pocket? Typically that'll start at somewhere between 4.5% and 6.5%, is sort of depending on the deal you're looking at, as far as like the cash on cash return. And then when you move to phase 3, which is the disposition of these properties, that's when you would realize hopefully some appreciation on that property as well. And the two of those together, I kind of consider your total return. And when you look at the total return, like multifamily deals that Inland has done over the past years, we've been looking at around a 9.5% kind of average return on their multifamily DSTs. So I kind of jumped you to slide 3 there, Dan. Sorry about that, but it's sort of segued nicely there.
So how do you get out of this thing? Is it easy? Is there a secondary market? Is there anything like a thing that I have to do beforehand to verify with you as far as accredited investor? You could go into those two things.
Yeah, so great question there. So the first thing is, to buy any of these DSTs is you do have to be an accredited investor, net worth of $1 million or earned income of $300,000, excluding your primary residence and that net worth. So a lot of times we're doing exchanges that on their own kind of qualify people as accredited, but certainly that's something we can work through with the individual as well. And as far as your other question, as far as how liquid they are, you really want to go into these things anticipating holding them the life of the DST. Technically, they could be sold. Your interest could go to, they could ask other people in the DST if somebody wants to buy your interest. I've been doing this for 18 years or something now, and I've never seen one of my investors sell a portion of their DST prior to the DST going full cycle. And you really want to be in it the whole time too, to kind of realize that appreciation, hopefully realize that appreciation on the back end as well.
So these are the 3 phases of the DST. Now I'm going to jump over to Lauren. If I have a yacht, Lauren, can I exchange a yacht?
No, you can't. Real property is the only type of property that will qualify. In 2017, with the Tax Reform Act, they actually eliminated personal property exchanges. So again, real estate is the only type of property that qualifies. Keep in mind that as long as it's for investment use, and that's how it's been held, or you've had the intent to hold it, it will qualify. You can trade a single family home for vacant land. You can trade vacant land for commercial space. You can trade the commercial space for the DST. So as long as it's real estate, it qualifies for an exchange. There's actually a question that came up too. I'm just going to address it since it's revolving Section 1031. It was the time frame for an exchange. So when you're doing a 1031 exchange, it's always good to have a conversation with your tax advisor or CPA before you sell that asset to determine what your tax liability is. And then at that point, you're of course going to consider what you're going to sell it for. You're going to work with your realtor or broker to list it. And then once you have that signed contract, that's the best time to set up your exchange account, because your exchange account does need to be set up before closing. Your time period begins when your sale takes place. So if your sale took place today, day 1 of your exchange period would be tomorrow. And you have 45 calendar days to identify possible replacements. We give you an identification form that you'd have to complete and submit back to us by 11:59 Central Time on the 45th calendar day. And then after the 45 days, you have another 135 days to close. So it's a total of 180 calendar days, which is just shy of 6 months just to answer that question.
And flippers, you can't have flippers, and also.
No, fix and flips don't qualify. Usually developers don't qualify because that type of asset, you're not looking to hold it. Your intent when you purchase it is not to hold it. It's to sell. You're going to put 30, 40, 50 grand in, update it, rehab it, and sell it. And again, the intent to hold requirement is critical. Developers typically don't qualify because their property is considered inventory to the IRS. So you don't really have that intent to hold. And there's nothing in the code that says that you have to own a property for any specific amount of time, though most experts will recommend that you hold it for 12 to 24 months because that income is going to straddle 2 or 3 tax years. So if by chance you were audited and they wanted to dig into your exchange, you could show I did have the intent to hold. I held it for a number of years. And so, having that intent to hold is critical.
So a second home how do you make a second home a vacation home? How do you make that part of?
Yeah, second homes and vacation homes typically don't qualify. And that's because the client, the taxpayers come to us too late. If you know someone that owns a second home or a vacation home, having this discussion with them early or, encouraging them to talk to their CPA early is key. You have to have used the property for investment purposes the past 2 years, which means that you've had to have rented the property out for 14 days out of each year, the first 2 years or the last 2 years, depending on whether it's a sale or a purchase. And you also must have limited your personal use to 14 days or 10% of days rented, whichever is greater. So you barely get to use it personally. So a lot of times people will say, oh, I'm selling my, my second home and I want to do an exchange and I use it all summer long. That's really not going to qualify. Proper planning typically is key.
All right. Well, thank you, Lauren. I'm going to jump over to Mr. Nate Kuhn. Nate, could you kind of talk about the different food groups of DSTs?
Yeah, sure. And I just want to hit one more thing on the vacation home thing real quick. It's different when you're selling the vacation home or second home, but even buying vacation homes are ways that people consider doing that as an exchange, which, is certainly something to consider and talk to Lauren about. But sometimes people end up deciding like, are you going to find your ideal vacation home in 45 days and identify it and be confident you're going to close on it in 180 days? Like sometimes that's a push, and like also how often you're able to use it and all those restricted uses can be daunting. So oftentimes what people end up deciding to do at the end of the day, if they're looking to buy a vacation house, is to instead just buy something that's sort of more, utilitarian. The DST, you don't really care about where you care about where it's located from a performance standpoint, but you don't necessarily care about what is the beach next to it like you would care about with your vacation home. So oftentimes what we have is people who are looking to buy a vacation home with exchange proceeds. They might actually go into a DST and use the cash flow coming from that DST to, pay the mortgage on a vacation home. So that's just another strategy, because then you don't have to follow any of those rules. You're just buying the vacation home as you would any other home, and you're using the DSTs to accommodate the 1031 exchange. So that said, with the DSTs, it's not about the beach next door. It's about the asset class that's going to be performing the best, or what we think is going to do well going forward. So I think it's nice that Inland has kind of taken the approach of not just being one-dimensional in the type of real estate that they offer in the DSTs, which allows people to diversify and also allows us to sort of look at not just like what worked before, but what's going to work going forward. Years ago, we saw a lot more net lease, a lot more office, and those are ones that we're not seeing as much right now. We're seeing a lot more in the way of kind of operating assets, which are generally things like multifamily, storage. On occasion, we're seeing some student housing as well, some medical office stuff. So those are the different type of DSTs that typically come to market. But when you're thinking of these, don't think it's really different than what most, I don't know, everyone on this call, what kind of real estate you're buying, but these are more like institutional type size of assets that are $50, $100 million DSTs with, half of that being raised in equity from investors.
Thank you. And then now we're going to jump back to Lauren. You kind of hit some of these points before, but Lauren, just real quickly, is it ever too late to initiate a 1031?
Yes, and we get this call a lot. And every time, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but unfortunately, there are certainly times where people will call and they'll say, I just closed, or I just closed yesterday. If you have already closed and you've not set up your exchange account, you're too late. You need to set up your qualified intermediary account before closing. We are going to set up your exchange account and prepare exchange documents that need to be drafted, signed, and returned to us before closing. We also are going to give instructions to your closing agent. So for example, on the settlement statement, it has to show that the funds are going to a qualified intermediary. If you take the receipt of funds, you take the check, even though you haven't deposited it, that's receipt of funds, and that's going to be taxable. So definitely keep in mind when you're doing an exchange will not delay a closing. You just want to make sure that exchange account is set up before you go to closing.
And you hit those days. You want to say anything more?
Yeah, real quick. Sorry, I forgot about the slide. So when you sell your property, the next day is going to start your exchange period. Again, these are all calendar days, so you need to include weekends. You have 45 calendar days to identify possible replacements. So this is really a great time. You know, if you're getting closer to your 45th day, you're not finding anything, or you're not able to reinvest everything in time, or you're just looking for, of course, passive ownership, reaching out to Nathan and his team is great. They've been great, especially on an educational level, to educate my clients on DSTs. So I know we're kind of going high level here, but if ever you have a specific situation, reaching out to them, they're really going to be helpful. And then after those 45 days, you have another 135 days to close. So again, total of 180 calendar days.
I guess I'll ask Nate this question. Nate, have you ever had a realtor call you saying that we need a DST tomorrow, or how does that work? What are some of the crazy story?
Yeah, I mean, we've had some where I was camping with my daughter and trying to answer phone calls with very spotted reception. You know, like some of the Zoom meetings we had earlier when COVID first started, you know, and you're like, can you hear me now? You know, one of those kind of situations, trying to get an identification appropriately by the 45th day. But, you know, we always like to, you know, we like to provide that education for people up front. And really, it's hard to say, you know, go with a DST when we're talking to an investor on the 45th day. So it's really a lot better to talk to myself and talk to Lauren really before give us enough kind of lead time beforehand, so that there's enough time for that education to work out any of the issues. Because a lot of times there's complications in how things are owned, if it's partnerships or, you know, different people wanting to do different things that own the property together. So we want to work through those issues ahead of time. And that's what Lauren's going to be involved in talking to you about. And I'm going to be talking about, hey, if we're going to do DSTs, here's how DSTs work in general, which kinds do you like? So then we're looking at inventory that's coming up. And generally when people decide they want to go the DST route, if they know that ahead of time, there's really kind of two types of exchangers that work with us. It's the people who know before they sell that they're going to go the DST route. And those people, typically within 7 days after they've sold their property, we've already got all their money deployed and they're in their DSTs. And the other type of people are people who are like, well, I might buy direct property, but if I don't find what I like, I'm going to do a DST. And those people might push closer to that 45th day to identify. But oftentimes with the DSTs, we are closed before that 45th day. I'd say a very, very vast majority of the time we're closed before we get close to the 45th day.
All right. Well, and then let me ask you quickly, Lauren, tell us about what the qualified intermediary. Are you, you have to be bonded? Can anybody do this, or do you have to have?
Yeah. Scary enough, anyone can do this. So if you were to go online and you were to Google a qualified intermediary, you may get thousands of results. Anyone can be a qualified intermediary. So they don't have to have any experience. They don't have to have any licensing. The good companies have gone to the Department of Treasury and requested that our industry be regulated. And they've said that the cost exceeds the risk to the client. So they basically don't want to pay to regulate organizations like ourselves. At Exeter, we have gone through the regulatory process where we're a bank and trust company. We're regulated by the Division of Banking. We hold your funds in a qualified trust account, which is a legally protected account in case something were to happen to our organization. As a QI, again, we're going to set up an exchange agreement so that we are allowed to be assigned into your transaction. We're going to prepare that documentation before closing to notate that you're doing an exchange. We're going to hold those proceeds again in that qualified trust account. Ours is a separate and segregated dual signature, which means that we require your signature to accept or release any funds. It's not commingled with any other client funds or corporate funds. We are going to monitor your exchange period, your 45 days, your 180th calendar days, and we're going to coordinate with the closing agents who are helping you sell and purchase. Someone also asked what happens during your 45-day period If on the 35th day, the replacements fall through, during your 45 days, just to be clear, you can change your mind as many times as you want. It's just once you're past your 45th day, you cannot amend your form again. So if on the 35th day, your property falls through, you could identify, you could revoke your previous identification. If you're after your 45th day, let's say it's day 60, and you say, I'm not going to purchase anything, you're now going to have a failed exchange, which is just a regular taxable sale. There's no penalty for attempting a 1031.
And the thing that we want to now go into are some of the different, like the three replacement property rule, the 200% rule. Could you touch on those? And then we're gonna acquiesce into Nate into Boot.
The three property rule and that, okay. So when you identify on the identification form, you are given three options. You can't just identify whatever you want. The most common and your first option is called the three property rule, which means that you can literally list three addresses that you are interested in purchasing. You do have to be as specific as possible. So you couldn't just say a condo in Chicago. You need an address, parcel number, PIN number, legal description, something of that nature. The second option, in case you did want to identify more than three properties, is called the 200% rule. And it basically states that you can identify double what you sold for. And that is the total amount of real estate you're identifying. So the number of properties don't matter, but your overall value will matter. The third option, which is not used very frequently, but it certainly could work for some people. It states that you could it's called the 95% exception. And it states that you can identify as many properties as you want, but you've got to close on 95% of what you've identified.
Great. Well, then Boot is something that needs to be explained, and you and Nate can talk about how these examples work for realtors.
Yeah, let's push it, guys, a little bit more energy, and let's go for it.
All right. So could you explain what Boot is, Nate, and go through real quickly what realtors can do?
Yeah, I mean, basically what we're talking about here is if you've purchased property and you still have some money left over, you can throw that money into a DST. So if you sold your property for $2 million, you found property for 1.2, normally you'd have to pay taxes on that 800,000 you didn't replace, but you can use a DST for a fraction of it. And back to that, like 35, it goes back to that 35 days, your deal fell apart that Tony asked. I mean, that's really the question there is that, you could look at buying your own direct property again or pivot to go DSTs. Or you can use DSTs as a backup identification in that three property rule as well, if you just weren't confident that your deal was going to close. End of the day here, what we're hoping to do is just give you an idea of what these are, but hopefully, you're not going to have to memorize what the 200% rule is, the three property rule. You start talking with Lauren and myself, you let us know what your goals are, what you're trying to accomplish, and then what we're going to do is help you figure out the best way to identify, give you some different solutions, and work through your exchange with you. So again, you don't have to be experts in this, just know it exists and then know who to reach out to, and we're happy to help walk through your own individual situation.
So if somebody has, they're going to do a sale and they're going to go into another property when there's money left over, that's where you've worked with realtors before too, right? That's what these examples are. Exactly.
Yep. When there's that leftover money that someone hasn't replaced into a property.
Okay. All right. So we're going to jump real quick. We talked about, Lauren, if you could talk about this slide real quick.
Yeah, real quick, one of the most misunderstood requirements of the exchange is the reinvestment requirement. Basically states that everything that you're selling, you need to reinvest into the replacement property. So oftentimes we have people say, don't I not only need to reinvest my gain, or don't I only need to reinvest my profit? You actually have to reinvest all of it to have a fully tax deferred exchange. So whatever you sell your property for, you can deduct routine closing costs like broker's commission, title insurance, our fees, things like that. And then what you're left with needs to be reinvested into that replacement property. If you don't reinvest everything, if you don't reinvest all the cash, you don't reinvest the debt that you just paid off at closing, that's going to cause tax liability. So of course you'd have to be aware of that and know what that might mean for you.
So because of time, would it be helpful, Tony, if we stopped here and then see if there's any more general examples that Nate or Lauren want to give, or any questions?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. We can always have you guys back. Make sure you put your contact information in the chat and send me a flyer or anything, and I'll redistribute it and make sure we get that out to our network. And if there are any questions, please put them in the chat. I know this is a complicated topic. We went through a lot of things. I really appreciate the DST. Disclaimer, not a disclaimer. Realtors, as a real estate agent, I don't make any money as helping a client through a DST, but I do it all the time. And you need a securities license to earn a commission or referral fee or anything like that when handling a DST. There's a lot of rules and regulations there. Dan, Laura, you guys got any final thoughts?
Nate, if you could do a quick, why would realtors want to work with you and do this? Just do that real quick.
I mean, I think realtors, property owners, I mean, it's just all about accomplishing goals for people, right? I mean, that's where the background I come from. And when you can help somebody accomplish their goals, if it's somebody who you look at an opportunity and you say, why is this land not developed and everything else around it is? Maybe somebody owns it that's just doesn't know what to do. If they sell it, they don't want to own something else and have to manage it. If you can show them a DST and something passive, that might be the solution to get you the opportunity to get that listing to say, hey, there's a solution for you, if that's what that person wants, to sort of get away from that active ownership. So I think from a realtor's perspective, that's really where that comes in, is helping people on the, getting those listings and being able to sell. And I think that's probably a question for Tony to answer too, where he's seen those opportunities, because I'd rather hear from him than me. That's what I see normally though.
I could do this part. Yeah, I could do this part. So a lot of times I'm talking to investors that they're thinking, hey, Tony, I want to sell, but I need to find a replacement property. And they're like, and I'm like, okay, we have a lot of inventory, but guess what? By the time I figure out how much your property's worth and market it, find a buyer and sell it, and we go through due diligence, appraisals, and all that stuff that comes with that. If that property I show you today is still available, you're going to be wondering what's wrong with it, right? Especially in today's market.
Right.
DST is a good vehicle because it gives them a level of confidence that they will be able to find a suitable replacement at the end of the process. And look at the investments. They're talking about, I don't know if you guys caught the subliminal messaging here, the Marianos on 39th and King Drive that was built. I think it sold for $38 million. I can't invest in I don't have $38 million today to invest to buy a property like Mariano's, but I may be able to come up with a couple $100,000 or $100,000 to invest in that pool with that other 1,099 investors and get a piece of that. Sometimes the investors are saying, Tony, I need to replace the cash flow, or I need to go into a 1031 exchange, and I'd like to get a property that's less management intensive. The DST is an excellent vehicle for that, replacing cash flow and getting into the 1031 exchange. The other thing, one of the more common ways that we use it is we do find that investor at a replacement property. They sell a property for $5 million. We find a CVS or Walgreens or something like that, and they have $1 million, and that property is $3.6 million. And now they have $1.4 million that they didn't invest. Either they can invest it or they can pay the taxes on it. If they've identified the DST, they can put that the balance, whatever is 100,000 or $1.4 million, into a DST and invest in a Walmart, a Home Depot. I think I saw ESPN offices up there, Jewel Osco, or a FedEx facility with Dan or Nathan, and round that investment out and diversify a little bit. So these are excellent vehicles for preserving wealth. They're excellent vehicles for legacy, and they're excellent armchair investments. But you need to be stable enough where they're not as liquid as, hey, 6 months later, a year later, you're like, hey, I want my money back. You got to be in it for the long haul, and you got to be in a position where you can do it like that. But they're excellent vehicles, and they work well for me as a realtor in signing up that listing and letting my client have the reassurance that we will be able to identify a property for you when the time comes.
Tony, I'm a little bit angry because I think now that Dan's going to replace me with you, because you did that. You did my part better than I ever could. I was just going to add one.
That's the realtor part.
I was gonna have one small part to that, like to Tony's point exactly, is like the DSTs are like the dumb analogy, like the bird in the hand, however that expression is. It's a bird in the hand versus in the bush. Like you could show your client, like, look, we're gonna look at other properties, but just know that this known quantity exists and these are gonna be here for you. These DSTs are here. Nate and his team are always gonna have 10, 15 different DSTs for you to look at. And you know, hey, we'll go out and see if we find something we like better. And if we don't, or if you're just more comfortable with these DSTs, great, that's an option for you. So hopefully it helps unlock some of those maybe log jams that you might have with somebody who's hesitant to sell because they're not sure what they're going to buy. So Tony, I couldn't have said it. I never would have said it as good as you did, but that's Tony. Take what Tony said. That's what we're looking for people on the DST side of things, for sure.
Well, Tony, thank you for your group. Thank you for your time tonight. Lauren and Nate, you guys are the best. So nothing but love, Tony.
Oh, thanks, Dan. Thanks, guys, for sharing. This was an excellent presentation. Dan did this presentation for my group over at the commercial forum about a month ago, and It was such a great presentation. I saw it a year ago. This time I really was able to pay attention to it. I'm like, the Southside Community Investors Association could really benefit from this. They're buying property all the time, selling property all the time. And also it gives you a little bit of a horizon. Like maybe you're not ready for the DST today, but you should be in a position where you're not going to be in the same place you are today 10 years from now. And 5 years from now, this option will be available for you. And after that presentation, Inland sent me a water mug, and that's the gift I was talking about earlier. That I got from Dan, and I really appreciated that, Dan, and I really appreciate you guys taking time out, Laura and Nathan, to do this presentation today and share it with the Southside Community Investors Association, and add some value to what we're doing over here to give investors another option, share best practices, and to help them to elevate and grow.
Love you guys.
For the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
See you guys. Have a good night. We're gonna go.
Thanks. All right. Yeah. So we're gonna be signing off as well. Again, thank you guys for coming out and participating. I don't know if Ebony, if you got any words here that you want to share. Any last thoughts? Ebony's probably
I had to get myself off of mute. Sorry. I just want to thank everybody from participating. I think tonight was a really great meeting. Thank you, Tony, for the panelists and everybody that you pulled together. Hopefully you all see the value in joining an organization like the Southside Community Investors Association. Tony put the contact information in the chat for the organization and for membership. We really want to build and grow our membership so that we can continue the type of advocacy that we've been doing for you guys, and that the NBOA has been doing as well. And all of that, you know, we have paid lobbyists and paid PR company that has been really working to put the story of housing providers, the true story of housing providers, not that we're not all Pangea. And the one thing that I noticed is that, you know, when they did the story about rent control today in the Sun-Times, they had a picture of a Pangea building with a big Pangea sign in front of it. But we need to let them know that, you know, Pangea is one major company, but there's a lot of us smaller housing providers out there. And this is our way of life. This is our way of living. And in order to continue to advocate for you, we need you to be members, and we need to be able to go and say, hey, we have, you know, 10,000 members, and our 10,000 members and their employees and the families who they serve will be damaged by these types of legislation.
Absolutely. Pangea has in-house lawyers and in-house counsel.
Right.
And most of the members of our group don't have attorneys on the payroll that they're paying, you know, a salary every year to make sure that they're handling everything and that they don't miss anything. And this is why groups like ours is important, because we have in-house counsel too. We have Ebony Lucas on our board of directors to help you to work through some of the challenges that you have and you face every day as property owners. thank you all. Thank you all for showing up. We'll see you next week. We're going to talk about some ways in which next month, we're going to talk about some ways that we want to give back to the community and create some internship programs to help people from the community learn this business of real estate, learn the trade of real estate, and also find out about things that are going on in the marketplace and some of the things going on the South Side with the Greater Chatham Initiative. Thanks again, and we're going to sign off. Thanks for sharing with us today.
Thanks everyone for calling in.
Thanks.
Thank you.